All right, we are now about to start. I think this is lecture 107. We are in the Rambam's Mor Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. We are in part 3. That's Chelek Gimel, chapter 22. And the page numbers I'm using is from the Shlomo Pinas edition. This volume, we are on page 488. And we are in the middle of the Rambam's discussion of Eov, right? He's been discussing the issues of the very thorny and important and difficult philosophical issues related to God's providence and the problem of the existence of evil. So, of course, the book of Tanakh that is most important to analyzing this issue is the Sefer Eov. So in chapter 22, we began his analysis of the Sefer Eov. And just a quick recap from last week, he mentioned the Rambam very strongly came down on the side of the opinion in Chazal that the entire story of Eov is a mashal, is a parable. He brought the machlokes in the Gemara between some that say that he really existed and some that say that it was just a parable. But then he said that l'chol hadeot, according to all opinions, the drama that happens in the first two chapters of God's court and an angel sitting in front of God and Satan coming in and challenging God, etc., where that was all completely a parable according to everyone. He mentioned that, and then he gave us a quick summary of Eov. And I talked to you last time. I gave you all a little summary of the book of Eov, and I very strongly recommended that you all spend the time to learn the book, because it is one of the most, it's an incredibly powerful and incredibly important sefer of Tanakh, which unfortunately doesn't get enough attention, but should. And I directed everyone to my podcast, which I just finished the entire Sefer Eov just about a month ago. It took me almost a year. I have a good 55, 60 podcasts on it. So if you want to spend that time, it's worth it. But we are on page 488, about to start the second paragraph. It starts the dictum of Scripture in the Pines edition. Now, I want to, for starters, the Rambam is going to reference the first chapter of Eov. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from the first chapter of Eov so that you all can understand what he's dealing with. So if we go to Eov Perek Aleph, it starts off talking about, Rambam talked last week about the Eov being the land of Uz. According to Rambam, the land of Uz was especially important because it refers to Eitzah. Listen carefully to this book, because you learn from here Eitzah, you learn from here wisdom. And then he he talks about how wonderful Eov was as a person, how God said he's an Ishtam, he's a tzaddik. And then it says, Vayihi Hayom. I'm at verse 6 in Eov 1. If you can follow inside with an Eov, great. If you can't, you just listen. It says like this, Vayihi Hayom. It happened on this certain day, Vayavo'u b'nei Elohim. Literally, that means, and the sons of God, presumably that means the angels came, Lihisyatsev, to stand or to present themselves al Adonai, before God. Vayavo gam hasatan b'socham. And the Satan, the Satan, came among them. Vayomer Adonai el hasatan. And God said to the Satan, Me'ayin tavo, where are you coming from? Where were you? Right away, one gets the sense that there's angels, and then there's something else called the Satan, right? Which God is going to, the Rambam is going to analyze that, what differentiates him from the other angels. So God says, Ma'ayin tavo, where were you? Vayan hasatones Adonai vayamar. And the Satan answers God and says, Mishut ba'aretz. I have been roaming around the earth, and just walking around, checking out what's going on the planet Earth. So Vayomer Adonai el Satan. So God said to the Satan, Hasamto libcha al avdi Eov. Have you checked out? Have you paid any attention to my servant Eov? Ki ein kamohu ba'aretz. There's no one like him in the land. Ish tam v'yashar. He's perfect. He's upright. Yirei Elohim. He fears God. V'sor meira. He turns away from evil. Vayan hasatones Adonai vayomar. And the Satan answered God. He didn't answer God's question directly. He didn't say, yes, I paid attention to Eov. He challenged God right away and says, Hachinam, is it for nothing, Yarei Eov Elohim, that he's afraid of God? Of course, Eov, it has got fear of God. Haloata Sachtabado, you protect him all the time, Ubiad Beso, and you protect his family, Ubiad Kol Shalom Misaviv, all of his belongings, you protect him. Maase Yadav Beirachta, you blessed all of the work that he does. He's successful. He's wealthy. Umikneu paratz baretz, and his belongings are all around the land. You know, everything's great for him. Of course, he's good. What kind of yeah? That means nothing. So ulam shlachno yodcha. So he says, however, if you would only send your hand against Eo v'ga b'chol asher lo, and touch, in other words, and hurt and harm that which he owns, imlo al panecha yivurcheka, then certainly he would go ahead and literally it means to bless you in your face. But this is the Tanakh's way, the Navi's way of saying he'll start cursing you, right? Go ahead and punish him. See what happens if you start taking away all of this good stuff you gave him. So Vayomer Adonai la Satan, and interestingly, God answers the Satan. He doesn't say, "Okay, I will." And this is a very important point, which we're going to come back to, and the Rambam is going to come back to. You, the Satan, you can go ahead and do whatever you want with him. Rak elav al tishlach yadecha, but don't harm him. And the Satan went from God. So let's hold that for a minute. I'm going to skip a little. The rest of the first chapter of Eov, Satan kills his children, takes away all of his riches, he makes him suffer a tremendous amount. But in the end, Eov says, the last verse of that first chapter, Eov still did not sin, and he did not criticize God. So then again, it says in the second chapter, this is important to understand what the Rambam is about to say. Another day came. So now, again, it says, the angels came to present themselves before God. And again, it separates the Satan. It separates. He also came among them to present himself. And God says to Satan, where are you coming from? And again, he answers the same thing. So God says again, and then the Satan says, yeah, sure, right? But he says again, without answering God and saying, yeah, I'm paying attention to Eov, he says, or ba'ad or, flesh for flesh. If you don't let me harm Eov's himself, you don't let me harm his soul, Eov's flesh himself, he's never gonna, I could never prove to you my point. So he says, you, God, should go ahead and punish Eov, or at least make him suffer. Punish is not the right word. Make him suffer. Then he'll start cursing you, God. So God says to him, and Vayomer Adonai la Satan, he is in your hand. So again, God didn't listen to Satan and say, okay, I will. He said, okay, you can. Achet nafsho shimar, but do not touch his nefesh, his soul, or do not kill him. So that I'm going to leave that. There's more, but that's what we need to understand in order to appreciate what the Rambam is about to say. So now that we have that, now let's go and look at and what the Rambam has to say here. So so the dictum of Scripture, referring to the sons of God, says in the two passages, it says to present themselves before the Lord, right? I read to you both, right? Because Rambam brings out both. Twice it says that the angels presented themselves before God. Now remember for a moment, the Rambam has already told us, he expects us to know that when we're in the middle of part 3, what Rambam believes and what he feels angels are, right? The angels are those emanations, those forces through which God governs the earth. So it starts from God and emanates throughout the spheres, all the way down to the planet that we live on, the sublunary world, right? Where we and you and I function, right? Those angels are the forces by which the emanations from God himself come and control the world that we live in, that we function in, right? So all of those angels present themselves before God, and we're going to see this more. I'm just kind of laying it out, but we'll see it as the Rambam says it. Those angels are there before God because they're always doing God's bidding. They're always, because that's how God created the world. That's how God runs the world. That's how the world works, through all of those forces of nature. But Satan is something else. He's a different thing. He's a different entity. Satan, however, though he came among their crowd and multitude the first and second time, even though it's true that on both occasions he did join them, right? It is not said in the first passage to present himself. It doesn't say that he came, Lihitzatzev, to present himself, because he's different. In the second passage, it does say, and Satan also came among them to present himself before God. Understand this notion and consider how extraordinary that it is. And see how these notions came to me through something similar to prophetic revelation. This is an extremely rare statement of the Rambam himself, saying that this is when the Rambam is saying about himself that when I read these verses, this came to me in understanding almost like a prophecy. The Rambam is saying about himself. Now, remember, though, that's while that might sound a little bit haughty to you and I, and the Rambam has not spoken like this at all in this book yet at all, but remember what Rambam thinks prophecy is. For those of us that studied together, prophecy is something that we all have a handle on, right? When we think and we understand something and we work without any selfish motives, we seek absolute truth, and we don't allow our physical matter to mess up our judgments and have us look for the selfish things that we need or want, etc. That is prophecy that we all have access to. And the Rambam is saying, and Rav Kapach points this out, exactly what I'm telling you here. When he reads this Rambam, Rav Kapach points back to the chapters where the Rambam explained what prophecy is. So what the Rambam is saying is, when I analyze these psukim, these verses, with 100% the search for real and solid truth, right, I understood something amazing, right? For the meaning of the words to present themselves before the Lord, what does it mean, Lihitzatzev el Hashem, to present themselves before God? What it means is that they exist as subject to his order and what he wills, right? It means that they are completely and 100% part and parcel of God's will, right? That those angels, those forces with which the world runs, through which the world runs, are 100% God's will. That's all they are. That's all they do. They're 100% pure God's will. Now, in the Rambam's cosmology, and remember, he introduced us to this, and it's important to remember, where then does evil come from? Where then does selfishness come from? It comes from matter. Remember, there's form and matter, right? The matter is the stuff within which the physical world that we live in is made of. The physical world, when you subtract from it the influence of the intellect, the influence of the intellect which is connected to on high, which comes from God, right? When we subtract from it, that is constantly going after only its selfish things. That matter was what we called the imaginary faculty. It's the part of our brain which sees only what we need to see, what we want to see for our own benefit, but doesn't allow. And the key to prophecy and the key to understanding truth is when we perfect our active intellect. In other words, our control, that which the Rambam calls the soul, right? And we seek 100% truth, and we control our behavior and our thoughts with 100% unselfish seeking truth, then we can control that matter. But when we subtract it from there, when we take our mind and our thought away from us seeking truth, and we allow the matter to do its own thing, right? In other words, we subtract it from doing the will of God. We just allow the matter to do what it wants for itself. That's where evil is allowed to reside. Okay, when we understand that, then we can start more and more to understand what the Rambam is trying to teach us is going on here in Iyov. Thus, Zechariah, with reference to the 4 chariots that go forth, if you look in the Navi Zechariah, and the angel answered and said unto me, these are the 4 heirs of the heavens, which go forth after presenting themselves before the Lord of all earth. Right? The Rambam is bringing this pasuk in Zechariah to remind us that those 4 powers that are being referenced there in Zechariah, and we don't have to go into it in detail now, but it uses the same language, because those forces that Zechariah is referring to in that particular vision are the forces which are coming from God, which come down and control the earth that we live on. Now, if we understand it though, it is consequently manifest that the status of the sons of God and that of Satan and what exists are not identical. And this is crucial because what this is saying is there is no such power called evil. This is the crucial point that the Rambam is saying. For the sons of God are more permanent and lasting. The angels that are sitting, that are represented in this parable as the sons of God sitting before God. Remember, Rambam said this is a parable. There is no actual tribunal where God sits around with his council, right? But those angels that are being referred to, right, those are the forces with which God controls the world. The Satan is something else. He's not one of them. So there is no such power as evil. This is the crucial point that the Rambam is making here. Now, while Satan has a certain portion, he has a place, right, which we're going to learn about and read about. He has a place, but it's below them in what exists. Satan's place is something completely different. It's below them. It's in this sublunary world. And this world that you and I live in, that's where Satan resides. He resides in matter. He resides in earth. He resides in the physical stuff, the matter with which we are made. It's completely different. This is obviously very different than other religions that have evil power that is somehow set up against God somehow. According to Rambam is pointing out, and he's using the psukim of Eov to point this out and make this point. There is no power called evil, right? Evil only happens from when we don't allow our intellects and our search for real truth control the matter which we're made, and we allow that matter to pursue its own selfish goals. That's where evil resides. Now that we get that, we'll continue. Furthermore, one of the marvels of this parable, I'm starting the third paragraph on the same page 488, of this parable consists in the fact that when it mentions to Satan, it says it roams especially over the earth. It's lashut ba'aretz. Remember, lashut is shin teth. Shin teth is the same root as the word Satan, right? What does the Satan do in this parable? He's lashut ba'aretz. He roams around earth. That's what he does. That's why he's called Satan, because he is here on this earth. He's not some heavenly power like those other powers, the Bnei Elohim, and accomplishes certain actions, right? Whatever he accomplishes right here in this world through the matter that you and I can touch and feel, right? It also makes clear that he is forbidden to gain dominion over the soul. Remember, I read to you, God said ultimately in the end of the story, he says, you can do what you want, but you have no control over the soul. Remember, according to Rambam, the soul is the active intellect. The active intellect is that which you and I have I'm saying in our minds, but I don't mean that it physically sits there, but it's that which we use to think. We can all have access to truth, to emes, to truth, to doing the right thing. And we just have to use it. We have to use it to control matter. But Satan has no place there, right? That capacity is something that's it's in all of us. It's in our soul. We can do it. We can use it. We have to do it, right? And Satan has no power there. He can't touch it. He's not allowed to touch it. And that's why God says you can do what you want, because the world, nature can do all kinds of bad stuff to us. But no matter what nature does, what's in our hearts and our minds is always 100% in our own control. And just think about that for a minute, because it's an extremely powerful thought. No matter what goes wrong in our lives, what we think and what we feel is still in our own control. Satan has no place there. So now it also makes, so he's forgetting that he has been given dominion over all terrestrial things. Everything on this world, everything terrestrial, does what it wants, can do what it wants, without having any recourse to having anyone control it by thinking, well, what's the right thing to do, right? It does what it wants to do. It does what its nature makes it do, right? But that he's kept away by a barrier from the soul. But the soul, what's in our soul, that he can't touch. This is the meaning of it saying only spare his soul. That's how Rambam learns that verse that I read to you before when he says, all you have to spare his soul. Okay. I have already explained to you that in our language, the term soul, what does it mean, soul? It's an equivocal term. It is applied to the thing that remains of a man after death. And remember, Rambam holds that our intellect, our active intellect, being that it emanates from God, right, is something that exists forever. It always exists. right? So in order to achieve eternity, according to Rambam, we have to develop that part of ourselves by developing our intellect and by studying and gaining knowledge and gaining control over the matter and not allowing ourselves to be ruled by physical matter, right? We gain eternity because that soul is eternal. This is the thing over which Satan has no dominion. He has no power over that. So after what I have mentioned, hear the useful dictum of the sages, right? To whom the term sages may truthfully be applied. The Rambam says, now we can look at some Mamari Chazal, some words of Chazal that are just spectacular, the Rambam says. Now we know why they're called Chazal. Why are they called Chazal? Chazal stands for Chachamenu, our wise sages, right? Of blessed memory. Why were they called wise? Because read to what we're about to read and you'll understand why they were wise. They deserve to be called wise. It clarifies all that is obscure, reveals all that is concealed, and renders manifest most of the mysteries of the Torah. It is their dictum in the Gemara. The Gemara says, and I'm at the top of page 489 now. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, and the Malach HaMaves, the Satan, the evil inclination, and the angel of death are one and the same. Now, what is the Rambam pointing out over here, right? What he's saying is that the Satan is the same thing as what's the evil inclination? The evil inclination, Rambam already explained to us, is the inclination that we all have within our bodies that makes us just want to do what we want to do, right? You know, you see something you want, you go for it, right? Without thinking, should I? Is it right? Is it wrong? Should I do something else? Should I not do this? Should I do that? No, the evil inclination we just want to do it, right? And that is what brings about suffering. Sometimes suffering to me, sometimes suffering to you, sometimes his decision to do that brings suffering to me, but it all comes about because of that evil inclination. And the angel of death, what is the angel of death? It's matter. Matter is something that's constantly coming about. Life comes and then life goes. Matter comes, it constitutes it to a human being, for example, or any animal, whatever it is. We go about our lives and then we die and end up being just matter again, right? So the Satan, the evil inclination, and the angel of death is all the same thing. It's all about physical matter. This is the key point right here. So that statement of Reish Lakish, or Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish in the Gemara, according to the Rambam, you look at that, and for this reason, our sages should be called wise because of this statement. If you don't think they're wise, look at this statement carefully, and you know that they are. Thus, he makes clear all that we have mentioned in a way that is not obscure for one who is endowed with understanding. If you just use your understanding, right, then there's no hidden secrets here. It's obvious what Reish Lakish is trying to teach us. It has thus become clear to you that these three terms designate one and the same notion, and that all the actions attributed to each of these three are only the action of one and the same thing. So the action that I or you or anyone does when we decide to do something that's wrong, right, is the same, comes from the same source as death itself, right? It comes from the same source as Satan. That's what it is, right? This is also expressed literally by the ancient sages of the Mishnah when it says, this is taught, he descends and leads astray, then he ascends and accuses, then he takes permission and takes the soul. It says, it's the Gemara talks about the Satan. The Mishnah says, right, the Satan goes ahead, he comes down here and convinces us to do something wrong, and then he goes upstairs in court and he's the prosecutor and says, look, he did something wrong. And then when the verdict is death, he's the same guy that comes down and carries out. He's the prosecutor. He's the one who convinced us to do the bad thing. He's the prosecutor and he's the executioner all in one, because it's all the same thing. That's the same idea. It is thus clear to you that when David saw in a vision of prophecy at the time of the plague, he saw a vision, and this is in Devrei Hayamim in the book of Chronicles, where first he saw an angel with a drawn sword in his hand stretched out over Jerusalem. What was David seeing? It was only showed to him in order to indicate a certain notion, right? The notion that plague, that death is represented by the angel of death. That same notion is expressed in the vision of prophecy, referring to the disobedience of the sons of Joshua the high priest, when it says that Satan was standing at his right hand to accuse him. Thereupon it is made clear in the following dictum how far Satan is from him when he says, "The Lord rebuked thee, O Satan. Either the Lord has chosen Jerusalem, rebuke thee." So again, these are all ideas. The Satan being the one, or the concept, the idea of evil, the concept of death is what happens when we take our soul away from the equation and we allow matter to do what matter wants to do without any thought, without any purpose, without consideration, without allowing our true intellect, our active intellect, to tell us and guide us as to what we should be doing. That is where death lies. That is where evil lies. And remember, as Rambam told us before, evil is there is no essence called evil. Evil happens when we take good away, when we take the good that comes from the active intellect, according to Rambam's understanding. Right? It was he who was seen by Bilam in the vision of the prophecy when he says, "Behold, I come forth as an adversary." Right? Know that the word Satan, the word Satan, right? We is sin test, test, nun, right? So the root of that is really sin test, right? So we already said lashut, right? Lashut ba'aretz is the same letters, sin test, right? Which meant to roam around the world. But listo, sata, also means to turn astray, to go away from, right? So here it's saying, know that the word satan derives from the verb sata, to turn away, right? Stay, mimenu, right? And this is that comes from a verse in Proverbs. Let me read that for you for a second. Hold on. I pulled it up over here. Where it says here in Pira'ehu al tavarbo, avoid it, do not pass through it. Sitei me olav avor, turn away from it and pass by it, right? That's so again, you see the word sata means to turn away. So I mean to say that it derives from the notion of turning away and going away. For it is he that indubitably turns people away from the ways of truth and makes them perish in the ways of of error. What is it that Satan does? It is those forces of nature that take us away, right? Takes us away from the right path, right? The things that lead us, the selfishness that leads us to do things that we should have known better had we used our mind, had we used our seichel, had we used our understanding. The same notion is expressed in the dictum, ki yetzer lev adam rak ra kol hayom, right? The inclination of a man's heart is evil from its start. What does he mean, the inclination? It means that's what the matter of which we're made of is constantly looking for our own satisfaction, our own gratification. You know how well this notion is in the Torah. I mean the notion of good inclination and evil inclination. The idea that we have the good, which according to the Rambam's cognitive model, which we've been through many times in this class, the idea of the active intellect, which needs to be developed, right? A person needs to work on understanding. He needs to learn. He needs to study. He needs to work on himself. He needs to ethically work on himself. He needs to become better, right? Right? That's the good inclination, which takes a lot of work, whereas the evil inclination is just the natural inclination of our bodies to do what we want to do. So as we know, as Chazal teach us, with both your inclinations, we should always serve God with both inclinations. And but we're almost not going to go into this in detail now. It's not that important. The idea here, what is important for here now, is that we have these two conflicting things. They also say the evil inclination is produced in the human individual as its birth, right? When a person is born, we have matter. We have the desires that matter puts it within us. We want, right, things. Sin crouches at the door, and so on, as the Torah says, right? From his youth, as the Torah says. On the other hand, good inclination is only found in man when his intellect is perfected. How does good come about? Good come about when we work on our intellect and we perfect ourselves in that manner. That is why the sages say that in the parable that deals with the body of the human individual. So he's really referring to Ecclesiastes, to Kohelet, and I'm going to tell you a little bit here. So if we look in Kohelet, that's Ecclesiastes 9, right? Verse 14. Kohelet pasuk Yud Daled Perek Tes. It says, Ir Kitana, there's a small city, Vanoshim ba ma'at, and there's only a few people in it. Uva Eleha Melech Gadol, and a great king comes, V'sovav Osan, surrounds it. Ubano Aleha Mitzodim Gedolim, and he builds siege works against it. Umatza ba ish miskein chacham. Within the city there is a person, a poor man who is wise and smart. Milathu esir b'chachmaso, and with his wisdom he saves the entire city. Right? And Ecclesiastes 4, Rambam's going to mention in a minute, verse 12, it also talks about, I'm sorry, verse 13, Tov yeled miskein v'chacham, a young man who is poor but intelligent but smart. Mimelach zakenu ksil is better than a king who is older but foolish. So what the Rambam is about to tell us here is that this um, point is trying to teach us that with our wisdom, all of that stuff, all of those mitzudots, all of those siege works, those powerful king and everything means nothing. With our intellect, we can control it all. So that's what he's about to refer to here. That in the parable, it deals with the body of the human individual and the difference of its faculties that figures in the dictum of scripture of Kohelet. There was a little city with few men within it, and so on. The evil inclination is called a great king, and the good inclination is called a poor wise child. All of these things are dealt with in well-known texts set down by the sages. May their memory be blessed as many times throughout the Gemara, throughout the Talmud, throughout the Mishnah, which discuss this parable in Kohelet and bring about these points. The Rambam is obviously not going to go through every single one right now. Now, as they have explained to us that the evil inclination is Satan, since we now know that this evil inclination, right, our inclination to go after our own selfish desires is what Satan is, right? So when it says, so now let's go back to who is indubitably is an angel, right? I mean that he too is called an angel in as much as he is found in the crowd of the sons of God, right? The good inclination must consequently also be truly an angel. Remember, what is an angel? An angel is a force of nature that runs this world. So in that respect, even Satan is an angel, right? Because how did God create the world? He created the world in which there is matter, and matter seeks after its own self-gratification, right? And matter seeks what we are calling evil when it is not controlled by the good inclination, when it's not controlled by, according to Rambam, the intellect. So in a sense, it is an angel as well. However, it has to be a much lower angel. It has to be of a different category, of a different type than the others, right? Because this angel is seeking after its own gratification, not doing that which, like the Rambam quoted from Zechariah, not doing the bidding that God wants it to do, right? But doing its own thing. And when God created matter, he created matter that it would do it, act this way. So in such that respect, evil is also an angel. Not the same type, not the same category, not the same level, but it's also an angel. Consequently, that well-known opinion figuring in the saying of the sages, according to which everyone's familiar, we sing Shalom Aleichem on every Shabbat night. Friday night we sing the song Shalom, welcome to the angels. We all tell the story of the two angels that accompany us home when we come home to eat dinner together on Friday night, right? There's a good angel and a bad angel, right? So what does it mean? We're one to his right and one to the left. It identifies these two with the good inclination and evil inclination. We have both. We have both an active intellect that tells us to do the right thing, and we have our bodies that tell us sometimes, unfortunately, to do the wrong thing. In the Gemara and Shabbos, it says, in another Talmud, it says clearly with regard to these two angels, one is good and the other evil. See how many marvels are revealed to us by this dictum, and how many incorrect imaginings it abolishes, and how many things we just knock out that are obviously wrong and incorrect. So as I see it now, and I'm going to finish up this chapter and I'll stop for a little bit of discussion, I have analyzed and explained the story of Eov up to its ultimate end and conclusion. In what I just told you, you can already understand the entire book of Eov, which is, 50-something chapters, right? But I am going to go into more depth of the Sefer Eov to explain to you the opinion ascribed to Eov and the opinion ascribed to each of his friends. Because after these two chapters, we have a lengthy argument between Eov and his friends. We're going to go into that in more detail soon, right? And using proofs that I gleaned from the discourse of each of them. You should not, however, pay attention to the other dicta rendered necessary by the order of this discourse, as I explained to you in the beginning of this treatise, right? But don't pay attention right now, right, to the to other things that you could get sidetracked as you go through the Sefer Eov. The Sefer Eov has a lot of lengthy speeches by each friend. So the Rambam is trying to tell us, don't get sidetracked. I want to give the main point here. Don't get sidetracked by all the little points. It's Eov. It's some of the most incredibly powerfully beautiful poetry in the arguments back and forth. Each one of the speeches is like a soliloquy from some of the greatest works of literature of all time. It's also often very difficult to translate. It's the most difficult book in the entire Tanakh to translate because some of the words are hardly used anywhere else. They're ancient, either Hebrew or ancient Arabic or ancient Aramaic words thrown in there. It's very difficult. So don't get sidetracked. But I'm going to show you from the main points. The Rambam says what these main points are. So just let's summarize what we had in this chapter so far. The Rambam defined to us that evil is not evil in a sense is an angel, right? Because it is a force of nature, but it is not an angel like the other angels, like the other forces of angels. It is what happens when we don't control matter with our active intellect, with the good inclination. And the Rambam therefore says when God tells Satan, right, you can do what you want, what God is really doing is saying, right, that nature can take its course, right? Nature can take its course. And how did he got attacked for he lost his things because he was first started by an attack from the enemies of Shiva. The Sabians came and attacked him, right? The winds and the forces and the storms collapsed the children's houses. The forces of nature are what was unleashed on Eov, not God, right? Not, God said away. He said, okay, nature, go ahead, do your thing. But the soul, Eob's soul, you can't touch. And that, Rambam says, is really the understanding of the entire book. But we're going to go a lot more into Eov. The next chapter, Rambam is going to go into more detail. But before I go there, I want to open the floor to questions and observations for anyone that has something they would like to contribute or ask.
Do we know who wrote Eo?
That is an extremely good question. Um, and it is not clear in Chazal who wrote Eov, because there's different arguments as to who Eov was and when Eov lived. Um, scholars also debate exactly when Eov was written. It's assumed that by scholars at least that it was written sometime in the Second Temple period. But there's probably parts of it that go much farther back than that. Um, So, so,
The
the Chazal attributed to Moshe Rabbeinu.
Moshe wrote it?
Yeah, Chazal attributed to Moshe, and so that's our
So that's
tradition.
exactly what I just said.
Right. But
Mhm.
it's a very exactly when he lived is like the Rambam said in the beginning. There's like 16 different opinions. If it was Moshe, then some of the opinions would have to say that he wrote it with Ruach HaKodesh, because Eov, according to some opinions, didn't live until the Bayit Sheni, until the Second Temple period. Regardless, it's yeah. So that's the answer to that question. Uh, if it was helpful.
I have a, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
There's no echo here. Okay. I'm going back, let me turn off my cell phone so you don't get an echo here. Okay, going back to something that you said, I'm trying to turn my cell phone off.
Uh-huh.
Okay, here it is. Okay, something you had said, I guess 2 weeks ago. So this idea of unleashing nature, and we're thinking
Okay.
of all the bad things that can happen.
Right.
Are we using, I guess it was Kushner who, talking about why bad things happen to good people, said, okay, so nature, God has unleashed nature, and inherent in nature, and it's kind of a project where he turns the key, it goes in motion as its own rules, and whatever happens. So if little kids die of some terrible disease, the building collapses, whatever, that's nature. And kind of God washes his hands of it because that's part of the physical world, and he set it in motion, and whatever happens. Am I simplifying this idea of nature
So,
and
um,
say it's Satan?
well, the Rambam until this point, because we've been discussing the problem of evil and from various angles now for I guess the last maybe 10 weeks or so. And and Rambam never quite gets to the point where he says nature just does its thing and God doesn't like care, so to speak, right? But
Right.
what rather what Rambam says is that uh well, first of all, he is going to get into more detail of the lesson of the book of Iyov and specifically this question at the end of the next chapter. But I don't want to pass totally on this question and just punt it. So the Rambam said on so many levels we can on many levels, right? If we use our intellect, we can control, right, what happens to us, right? A person like he said, a person who's truly controlled by his intellect and when Rambam says intellect, he means the active intellect through which we control our actions and always doing the right thing. We can avoid many of this stuff. Like he said, he used the example of the shipwreck, right? Right, where you make a decision to go on a ship that didn't pass its last safety inspection, and you go before you check the weather report, and you go before you check that the captain of the ship is experienced and knowledgeable in how to run the ship, right? So in other words, when you do the right, and then you think about what's the risk of going in a ship, right? You have to think, is it worth the risk? Going in a ship is risky. Don't take stupid risks just to make profit, right? So the Rambam there, in other words, so in many levels we can control, right? By using our intellect, the things that happen to us. Many of the things that happen to us, right, are of our own doing. We build a house in a floodplain and then we cry when it floods. We build a house cheap without thinking about earthquakes and then it collapses in an earthquake. This happens because of corruption, this happens because of selfishness. A huge amount of human suffering that we sometimes attribute to acts of God are really of our own doing, right? Now, Rambam admits and understands that doesn't explain everything, right? Because, like your example, a child, God forbid, who's born with a genetic disease, right? Who controlled that, right? Now, to some extent nowadays, science can help us control some of these things, right? So in Rambam's time, there were less things that were controllable. Nowadays, some of it, not all of it, obviously there's a lot of suffering so to a large degree, that explains the issue of the active intellect controlling what happens to us. Again, I know that doesn't answer the whole question, but then there's more to the answer. So there's also the issue that we cannot necessarily control nature, but we can control how we react to nature, right? In other words, even bad things that happen to us, we can take it and make something good out of it, right? We can use it to grow. We can use it to become better, and so on. Now that also explains some of it, but not all of it, right? Right. Ultimately, what's going to happen in the end is that Rambam is going to tell us, he already did kind of, that's why it's not a total spoiler, but he's going to say it really powerfully when he tells us the lesson of the book of Iyov is that it's arrogant of us to think that we know, right, what providence is supposed to look like, right? When we say to ourselves, this is not fair, this is not right, this is not just, right? And it seems pretty obvious to us that this is not right and not fair and not just. We're making the assumption that our justice is the same thing as God's justice. We're making the assumption that because we think something isn't the way it should be, that's also how God works. And remember, Rambam emphasized so strongly before he got to this chapter that God's knowledge is not the same as our knowledge, and God's justice is not the same as our justice. It's something we have no way possibly capable of understanding, of comprehending. Anything that has to do with God is something that's completely out of our realm. And to think that we can ask a question of God's justice, right, because it doesn't look just to us, right, isn't it of itself an arrogance that we shouldn't do? In other words, we should still try our hardest, right, to use our intellect to control the world around us, right, so that we don't subject ourselves to unnecessary risks, right? We should still live a healthy lifestyle, right? If you go ahead and smoke cigarettes, 2 packs a day for 20 years, and then you get lung cancer, I mean, the Rambam would say, well, listen, bud, don't start complaining to God, right? I mean, what you decided that it would be more important for you to smoke cigarette. I mean, that's an obvious example, but we all do these things. We spend $1 million on thousands of dollars on a credit card, and then we kvetch that we have too much debt 2 years later, right? And we just, or all these kinds of things. The Rambam would say, well, don't go complain to God, right? You didn't use your active intellect, right? So, and the Rambam is going to be telling us, as this Chelek Shlishi, as the the part goes, if we lived by the rules of the Torah, right, then we would eliminate most of this stuff, right? According to the Rambam, the Torah and God's guidance to us, by telling us the way we're supposed to live, he was telling us how to make sure that we don't have all of this suffering, right? Everything, according to Rambam in the Torah, makes actual sense, right? If you treat other people the way you expect to be treated, right, then you're much more likely to not suffer from somebody coming and punching you in the face, right? It doesn't mean that it'll never happen, right? But if you live properly, if you give charity, then it's much less likely that there's going to be starvation and poverty in your community, right? If you separate parts of your field and make sure the poor have what to eat, it's a lot less likely that there's going to be civil unrest and political instability, right? So, and Rama is going to explain all this to us, and that if we live a life that the Torah prescribes to us, then we're much less likely to have that kind of suffering, right? But it still doesn't answer everything. Ultimately, the bottom line answer is that we have to remember that God's knowledge, God's justice, whatever God does, is things that we can't comprehend, because even to think that it should be like the way we imagine things should be is arrogance in and of itself, because we can't comprehend God. God is an entity that we can only talk about in negative things. I can only say he's not like us. I can't say what he is like, right? When we talked in the past about negative theology. So this is this is what we're going to come to. The next chapter, we're not going to have time for tonight, but the next chapter he's going to analyze Eov, and he's gonna explain a lot of the points that I just made, but he's gonna bring it out, and obviously Rambam can do a better job than me. But this is where he's aiming towards. Is this idea, that we just said. I don't know. I probably answered more than you asked for, but
Oh,
yeah. Since I don't have time to really start the next chapter, still, if there's other questions or issues, I think that's a good time to do it now. So I want to make a point, because we have just a couple minutes left. The Rambam's theology is extremely different from the idea, right, that when we keep the Torah, right, we get a prize, right? When we do a mitzvah, God treats us well and he does us a favor in return. You understand? It's not a transactional relationship according to Rambam. It doesn't work that way. I don't say, I'm going to wear tefillin today so that God will reward me and give me a raise tomorrow, right? The Rambam is philosophically and morally opposed to that even concept, right? According to Rambam, I put on tefillin because of the reasons he's going to describe to us. Because by putting on tefillin, it helps me focus my thoughts on God, and it helps me and it enables me to serve God better, so that my life becomes better, so that the world becomes better. Not in a magical way, but in a very real, measurable way, right? When I follow the laws of the Torah, it becomes better because it makes sense, because it philosophically makes the world better. This is the key fundamental idea, really, of this entire book. And as he's been laying the building blocks towards this conclusion, this entire book. And then we're going to see, I forget exactly which chapter, about 5 or 10 chapters from now, he's going to start talking about the reasons for the mitzvot. The idea that, according to the Rambam, it's inconceivable that a mitzvah should not have a logical reason. He concedes, and you'll see as we go through it, that he himself and we may not always understand exactly what the reason is, but he promises us and assures us that there is an actual, physical, real, philosophically understandable reason for every single one of the mitzvot that God gave us, right? And and if you keep this mitzvot, that you keep the rules that the Torah gives us, our lives will be better and the world will be better. And if we all did it, then the entire world would achieve, the goals that God wants for us in this world. And this is the fundamental building block of Rambam's philosophy. And that's really what we're aiming at. And we're gonna see. Next week it's a long chapter, the next one, but of course it's I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it in 1 week. I wish I could tell everyone to go read the entire book of Eov over the next week, but it's a long book, and it's really one of the most difficult just simple translation is in many cases extremely challenging. But if you can take take your favorite translation. I'd recommend the Koren, the new Koren translation. But take your favorite translation, any decent one. The Jewish Publication Society has a good one, and just read through Eov. It's very worthwhile, and you'll understand. If you don't get every single thing, that's fine. You miss, like the Rambam says, don't get too lost in these poetic, analogies and stuff that you might not catch. But you'll get the gist of the book just by reading it, so that you can understand the chapter that we're going to study together. Okay? I think this is a good point to stop right now, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. We have a lot of really cool stuff to do together. Even though we're getting to the close, but we got a lot of really cool stuff to do together. So I thank you guys thank you very much for joining, and looking forward to next week.
Thanks all. Thank
All right, be
you.
well.
Thank
Very
you.
much. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.